Isaac Asimov. Whatever you've probably read something of his. Science fiction, of course. His Foundation series is a classic. Science fact, chemistry, astronomy, physics, biology, children's books, history, math. One scientist calls him the greatest explainer of the age. The American Humanist Association has named Dr. Asimov the Humanist of the Year, and some religious folk have considered him the incarnation of the devil.
I feel that, as seems to me any civilized, humane person should feel, is that every person has a right to his own beliefs and his own securities and his own likings. What I'm against is attempting to place a person's belief system onto the nation or the world generally. You know, we object because we say constantly that the Soviet Union is trying to dominate the world, communize the world. Well, you know, the United States, I hope, is trying to democratize the world. But I certainly would be very much against trying to Christianize the world, or to Islamize it, or to Judaize it, or anything of the sort. And my objection to fundamentalism is not that they are fundamentalists, but that essentially they want me to be a fundamentalist too. Now, I can imagine they object. They say, I believe that evolution is true, and I want everyone to believe that evolution is true. But I don't want everyone to believe that evolution is true. I want them to study what we say about evolution and decide for themselves. Now, they say they want to teach creationism on an equal basis, but they can't. It's not a science. You can teach creationism in the churches, in the courses on religion. I mean, they would be horrified if I were to suggest that in the churches they teach secular humanism as an alternate way of looking at the universe, or they teach evolution as an alternate way of considering how life may have started. In the church, they teach only what they believe, and rightly so, I suppose. But on the other hand, in schools, in science courses, we've got to teach what scientists think is the way the universe works. And they figure there was a collision with some object from outer space, which perhaps cast up such a pall of dust and smoke that it cut off sunlight for a period of time, killed most of the plant life, and therefore killed most of the animal life.
And what about the Star of Bethlehem?
Well, some people think it might have been Halley's Comet, which showed up at 11 BC.
Do you believe that?
No, I don't. It's because there are so many other theories about it that there's no way of telling which one, if any, is right. It may have been entirely a pious fiction. We can't tell at this date. The only mention of the Star of Bethlehem is in a couple of verses of the Gospel of St. Matthew. That's all. There is no independent reference to the star anywhere.
Are you a religious man?
No, I'm not.
Why not?
Well, the easiest answer is I wasn't brought up so.
Yeah, but I mean, you are obviously a very curious man, and you have an open mind about everything.
Oh, sure.
And so you investigated religion and came to the conclusion that?
No, I can't say I investigated religion with any particular interest, but I was interested in the Bible as a work of literature. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a 2-volume book on that, but only as a work of literature, as one of the earliest, if not the earliest, serious histories we have. The Book of Kings, the Book of Chronicles, the Book of Samuel, and also as a repository of great poetry, probably the greatest poetry we have, certainly the greatest early poetry we have, and also as teachings of rather excellent ethical ethical statements. Yeah. The one thing that the Bible isn't, that some people seem to think it is, it's not a biology textbook, it's not an astronomy textbook. The first chapter of Genesis, the first couple of chapters of Genesis, are the 6th century BC version of how the world might have started. We've improved on that since. I don't believe that those are God's words. Those are the words of men trying to make the most sense that they could out of the information they had at the time.
You don't buy Adam and Eve either.
No, I don't buy Adam and Eve either. But it's undoubtedly a legend which has some significance, but it's not historical.
What about the life of Christ?
Well,
Jesus.
Well, this, of course, is in historic times. It's at the time when the Roman Empire was at its height. And the thing about it is that the only information we have about the life of Jesus is in the Gospels, in the New Testament Gospels. There's no reference to him in any literature outside. There's one dubious paragraph in the histories of Josephus, which may have been...
Is that right? There's no reference to Jesus other than Matthew, Mark, Luke, John?
And, of course, in the rest of the Bible, the epistles of Paul, Acts of the Apostles. Right.
But
outside the sacred writings, absolutely no mention.
No historian who was not...
Who is not a Christian, let's put it that way.
Not in Bethlehem, no one left any writings of any kind?
None, none. This doesn't mean that he didn't exist. The chances are he did. There were many people at the time who were, what should we say, messianic, who were believed to be messiahs by one group or another. And Jesus survived as a Messiah.
Incredible impact for someone who got such little notice at the time from historians, right?
That's true, but that's the way sometimes it works out. When Mohammed also received little notice outside of Arabia, and I dare say many founders of great religions were dismissed by people of the time, except those who believed in them as just one more kook. But then you see, in science fiction, you're allowed to depart from scientific possibility, provided you know that you're departing from it and can explain it. The reader will go along with you into the realm of fantasy if you will give him an excuse. But to do it without realizing you are going into fantasy is insulting to the intelligent reader.
But of course, this is what frightens many believers. They see science as uncertain, always tentative, always subject to revisionism. They see science as a complex and chilling and enormous universe ruled by chance and impersonal laws. They see science as dangerous.
That is really the glory of science, that science is tentative, that it is not certain, that it is subject to change. What is really, in my way of thinking, disgraceful is to have a set of beliefs that you think is absolute and has been so from the start and can't change, where you simply won't listen to evidence. You say, if the evidence agrees with me, it's not necessary. If it doesn't agree with me, it's false. This is the legendary remark of Omar when they captured Alexandria and asked what to do with the library. He said, if the books agree with the Koran, they are not necessary and may be burned. If they disagree with the Koran, they are pernicious and must be burned. Well, there are still these Omar-like thinkers who think that all of knowledge will fit into one book called the Bible and refuse to allow that there is even the conceivability of an error there. That, to my way of thinking, is much more dangerous than a system of knowledge which is tentative and uncertain. I would choose the last one phrase that I wrote when I was 21, which was, in a way, a steal from Samuel Johnson, who said patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. In other words, when you get a guy right down where you have him backed up against the wall, he says, I did it for national security. I remember a president who said it. But what I said was that violence is the last refuge of the incompetent.
Probably true.
To allow a dispute to come to the point of violence means that someone wasn't smart enough to settle the matter before then.
Which And,
that's a good way to put it,
which
isn't it?
is writ
We
large,
weren't
the
smart
large
enough.
problem we have, whether we're collectively smart enough not to destroy ourselves. In a
One
certain
kid
sense.
wrote to me and said, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. Why is there so much violence in the world?
And why are there so many incompetent?
And I wrote back, because there are so many incompetents.
Well, the first thing that's important about Halley's Comet is that it was the first comet to have its orbit worked out and its return predicted. That made an enormous splash in the 18th century, because until then, nothing had been known about comets. They were very mysterious. People were scared of them. They were omens. They were omens of unusual things happening, and unusual things are always catastrophes. But once you can show they follow a fixed orbit and come back at predictable times, there's nothing mysterious about them anymore. And so that was the doorway into studying comets as simple, ordinary astronomical phenomena. And then the other importance about them is that it's the largest and brightest of the short-term, short-period comets. The only ones that are larger and brighter come in from way out there.
And when was the last time that we saw it?
1910.
1910.
Yes. It was a much better show then than this one is now, because it passed Earth closer to it, so that it looked larger and brighter.
So this is a big deal.
Well, it's a big deal this year for our astronomers, because for the first time in history, they're going to be sending out probes to pass close by Halley's Comet and study it.
The Soviets are doing a better job than we are of doing that, aren't they?
Well, let's say human beings are sending out 4 probes. It doesn't matter the nationalities. There are 2 Soviets, 1 Japanese, 1 West European.
Yeah.
The West European, named Giotto, will come closest. It'll pass within 500 miles. But whatever material they find out, whatever
It'll be
details...
shared by the international scientific community.
That's right, so that human beings are doing it.
Do you see any room for reconciling the two world views, the religious view, the biblical view of the universe as God's drama, constantly interrupted and rewritten by divine intervention, and the view of the universe as scientists hold it, always having to be subjected to the test of observation and experimentation? Is there any room for reconciling?
Well, there is, if people are reasonable about this. There are many scientists who are honestly religious. You can rattle off the names of them. Millikan was a truly religious man. Morley of the Michelson-Morley experiment was truly religious. There were hundreds of others who did great scientific work, good scientific work, and at the same time were religious. But they did not mix their religion and science. In other words, they did not presume that if something they didn't understand took place in science, they could dismiss it by saying, well, that's what God wants. Or, at this point, a miracle took place. No, no. They know that science is strictly a construct of the human mind working according to the laws of nature, and that religion is something that lies outside and may embrace science. Well, on the other hand, you know, if there were suddenly to arise evidence, scientific confirmable evidence, that God exists, then we'd have no choice. Scientists would have no choice but to accept that fact. On the other hand, the fundamentalists don't admit the possibility of evidence, let us say, that would show that evolution exists. Because any evidence you present, they will deny if it conflicts with the Word of God as they think it to be. So that the chances of compromise are only on one side. And therefore, I doubt that it will take place.
Dr. Asimov, most people, when they think about the future, try to reach out to the year 2000. Let's try 500 years from now. What kind of planet do you see?
One of two, depending on what happens by the year 2000. If by the year 2000 we have not solved the problems that face us today, then I would say 500 years we'll see a world containing a technological civilization in ruins, in which there will be a relatively small number of human beings sort of surviving, and with New York City as the most magnificent ruin in the history of the human race.
And the other is?
If we succeed in solving our problems today, then 500 years now we can well be living in a kind of utopia, a world with a relatively small population, carefully husbanding their resources, with a working colony on the moon and perhaps on Mars, reaching out to the entire solar system, taking advantage of advances in technology we now can't even imagine, living under conditions which, when they look back on the present, they will be horrified and wonder how we could have survived.